All right, we're going live. Let's see how it shows up.
Oh, man.
Redirecting to Facebook Live page. Hey, and so if anyone out there is watching this particular broadcast, it's me with Professor Dan Gonzales, and we are live. We should be live.
Live from the MoMA in New York. Yes.
Yeah. Well, is that where it is? We are just we're broadcasting this on Saturday, and we're earlier than we usually are because oh yeah, we're live. We're live now. And so welcome everyone.
Hey, good morning. Good morning all.
I'm Emil Guillermo, the museum director of the Filipino American National Historical Society Museum. I'm with in gallery view with Professor Dan Gonzales. It's good to see you. And
Great to see you.
This is an historical moment, an historical weekend, and I thought, what better person to kick off our talks about Filipino, American history? Really, what better person to kick off our talks on Filipino American history than Professor Dan Gonzales, San Francisco State? Thank you, Dan, for being here.
Thank you for the compliment, but right off the top of my head, I could think of 5 people that are better. But I'll tell you why.
But not 5 people who would take, who would comment on something that is, I don't want to say it's potentially explosive, but it's a sensitive topic because
it is, and two of them would be off the wall critical. And so that would not be good for FANHS. I think they'd be a little bit too extreme. They're too willing to go way out there.
Well, and look, look, FANHS and the FANHS Museum is not political, but we would be sticking our heads in the sand if we did not understand that our political life, our political culture is part of our history as Filipino Americans. We would be remiss if we did not understand that how we participate in the society is important and how we are able to participate politically. And in fact, we do participate politically. We know that because we have such data as the Asian American National Voter Survey, which comes out every political cycle. And the AAPI data survey, which was taken July to September, had 248 Filipinos who participated in this, enough to create a national sampling in a political poll that you can make statements about, well, where are Filipinos compared to other Asian Americans, compared to other people in general. And that's why I think it's worth talking about this. We're coming into a very critical time. Before we get to the AAPI data stuff, we have to acknowledge the news. Well, I don't know exactly where we are in terms of this upcoming election that's going to happen November 3rd and where Filipinos are because the campaigns are because of the illness of President Trump. Where are we, do you think, right now, Dan?
Very difficult to tell. Where are we going? About the campaigns first, or you want to?
Well, let's go with let's just go with the history, because right now we have a president who is sick, and we have an administration that is not forthcoming in terms of his illness. Do we deserve to know how sick the president really is? How threatened his life is? Is that something that Filipino Americans need to know?
I think everybody would need to know that. If we were going to do it intelligently and sensitively, we should be trusted with that information. However, political history has shown, and this is up your alley, Mr. Hobbit, political history has shown no president has ever come forward except one, and that was Eisenhower, 1956. Other than that, the rest of them either withheld, there's a range, right? But they either withheld information about their condition, okay, or they outright lied about it. And I think the worst example was Woodrow Wilson.
And that was connected to the Spanish flu, right?
Well, it should be called the American flu because almost 700,000 Americans died from it. And secondly, much of the infection that occurred in England and France was brought over by members of the military who were infected, obviously, from the long-term crossing on very crowded vessels. And that's a part of American history that most people either don't know or would rather, forget. Now, several American historians have come out and validated those stories. So Eisenhower came out and rather humbly, but I think bravely at the same time, came out and said, yeah, I'm getting an operation. I'm gonna be temporarily out, anesthesia, and it's surgery. And they even explained it was intestinal problem. And they actually discussed publicly, his doctors did, how healthy he was by describing his bowel movements. That's
a lot of detail, and it's good that you bring that up, because within the hour we just had a press conference that the White House doctor went out.
Yeah.
And he refused to talk about his temperature. He refused to talk about oxygenation. He refused to talk about everything that you were just talking about. I mean, but here's the one thing he didn't, and it may have been inadvertent, but he said that the president got the virus. He was diagnosed on 72 hours from now, from 72 hours in the past, from Saturday morning. That's when this press conference took place. 72 hours goes back to Wednesday when they knew, and Wednesday when they knew, the president was traveled all over the place. He had fundraisers. He was wearing no mask. That would have to be irresponsible behavior. And that would be almost endangerment to all the people in the immediate White House workforce, press corps, the people, his supporters. If I were a Trump supporter now and I were to, go up and embrace him and, want to shake his hand or go to his rally without a mask, I would feel, as a Trump supporter, I would feel betrayed.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, I know, but if I were a Trump supporter, I would just say, to see if someone were out there doing stuff when you knew his inner circle, and he knew that he was possessed of the virus. I mean, people will have to be their own judge, but I know that already we have some top people coming forward saying they have the virus. Kellyanne Conway, who's married to a half Filipino guy, George Conway. Kellyanne Conway said she has it, and she was at that Rose Garden coming out party for
some of the strongest supporters of Mr. Trump all have come down with COVID.
Right. Chris Christie also.
Chris Christie.
Senator Mike Lee, Senator Tillis. I mean, all of these, the two senators.
Yeah, Mike Lee, the alleged constitutionalist, right? Yeah. I use one of his books for comparison. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things about those two senators is that they would help form a quorum to allow the Senate or the Judiciary Committee to go forward and get Amy Coney Barrett, through the nomination process. And now if they're sick, they endanger that. So what we see is a kind of a reckless behavior on the part of the president. If he knew, and the White House doctor said, yeah, he knew on Wednesday, that's when the president got the virus. And so now he was in the White House yesterday. He takes the helicopter. He walks out to the helicopter for show. Apparently, that's according to reports. And now he's airlifted to medevac, essentially, to Walter Reed, which is not that bad a drive. If you drove it, I mean, you could drive it if you weren't seriously sick, but he helicopters in. and now he's there and will be there for 5 days.
At
I
least, at
Yeah,
least to,
at
to
least
our knowledge.
I think of the Filipino Americans who are on the front lines. And you know that I've talked to nurses on the front lines in Elmhurst, Queens. You know, I've talked to doctors, Filipino doctors working in New York, and they complain of PPE, but they do it out of duty. They're out there in the front lines and do it out of duty. And how do you think they would feel if they knew that the commander in chief was acting this way, knowing that he has the virus?
I think the majority of Filipinos who are in the medical professions have already formed a perspective on all of this stuff. And as you say, they do it because of their sense of commitment, not only to the profession, but to their own personal values. And so from a very early time, I've always said that politics is all encompassing. And I've also always said that much of politics is about psychology. And if you're going to go to psychology, you have to look at what people believe. Filipinos in the medical system believe in doing their jobs well. They're committed to helping other people. Okay, much more so than many professionals in the medical area that I have known personally. A lot of them were in it for the money, frankly, and you could tell because as soon as their insurance costs went up, they left the profession because they had enough money from their previous earnings to do it. Filipinos hang in there for career because they love it. They love doing it. They feel fulfilled, okay, by the great majority, okay? Now, in my classes that are heavily populated with Filipino Americans, I ask at the beginning of the semester, how many people in here have relatives that are nurses? And I do that because I want to impress not only the non-Filipinos, but the other Filipinos with how much of our population, especially on the coasts, right, are dedicated to the medical professions. Then I go through the pharmacists, I go through nurse practitioners and all the rest of that, but doctors as well. Okay, so that's who we have. Now, while only 4%, I was shocked to see this, but if the statistics are correct, only 4% of the total number of nurses in the US are Filipino. Okay, that's the stats that I have.
Yeah.
31% of the nurses who have died from COVID-19 are Filipino.
Wow.
So
4% are nurses.
4% of the total number of nurses are Filipino, but 31% of all of the nurses who have died from COVID-19 are Filipino.
Right. And that says something, when I talk to the nurse, Jim Scorp, on a number of these podcasts and on FANHS, what struck me was he had this compassion,
yes,
and passion for people. So they put people first. They don't put themselves first. He didn't care about, what kind of exposure he was facing. He just wanted to help people, and he saw it as his duty to keep his patient alive. And if his patient died, it was like the worst thing that could happen. And I think that's a thing that during this whole COVID period, if you were in the nursing profession, if you were in the health field, I think you have an unusual perspective of how Filipino Americans coped or dealt with this period of history. You were in the front lines, and you're special. You're special for the kind of effort you put out throughout. And I can't help but think that when they hear of the news that is breaking today about when the president knew and how he acted when he knew, how irresponsibly he acted, I can't help but think that it's going to upset some people.
It upset a lot of people, but to be utterly frank, I developed a term that is a contraction of the words crazy and stupid, and it's crapid.
Crapid.
There are people who are crapid. Now, And that includes some people of Filipino ancestry.
Yeah. Well,
There are a lot of people who are dyed in the wool, immutably Trump voters are crapid. They ignore all of this stuff. They've ignored it all from the beginning. They rationalize it as fake news. They believe the disinformation that's coming out from a wide variety of sources, including Facebook. And I mean, I'm sure you've got several thousand followers on Facebook, man. And so, we have to be very careful about what we say. And people ask me, what are you doing putting all this political stuff up on Facebook? I'm fighting back.
well,
I'm
look,
trying to provide people with a critical perspective that contradicts the garbage that's out there, the intentional disinformation.
well, the important thing is we're for the truth. Filipino Americans are sort of caught in the middle of this truth. They're participating, they're not participating.
Yeah, but
They're
they watch
actually,
Fox, dude. They watch Fox and they
well, and
believe
that's
it.
and that's fine. I mean, that's their choice. I'm just saying that the historical perspective is to look at this from afar and to see how it plays out. I think that this is our time. We're taking no
Okay,
side. I'm not taking a
okay,
side. I'm not
okay.
taking a side here.
Philippine history first.
Mm,
Okay, the Katipunan.
mhm.
Okay, they're glorified as people who fought for democracy as the first nation to try and establish a democratic republic in Asia, which lasted about 5 seconds, right?
Mhm.
Because the Americans took over, and by December 1898, there was no more independent Filipino Republic. They had become a territorial protectorate of the United States, a colony of the United States. The Katipunan sold out. The leadership of the Katipunan took an offer from the Spaniards, right, to quit the revolution and head off for Hong Kong. And they took a $400,000, 400,000 peso award for doing so. And then they complained about the rest of where's the rest of the 400,000 when they got to Hong Kong. That's the leadership of the Katipunan that gets glorified in many texts as the people who established the first democratic republic in the Philippines.
The
And it's a
Malolos Republic.
ridiculous position to take. Okay, but Filipinos need a source of pride, and if they can believe in the quasi-mythological position that Filipinos established the first democracy in Asia, that gives them an opportunity to look like part of the modern world and lean on the philosophy of real democracy, one person, one vote.
All right, now
The
wait a minute.
Philippines doesn't even have jury trials, man.
All right, so
How democratic is that?
what you're saying is that when people immigrate from the Philippines and they come here to America, and they come with this sort of political cultural baggage that is part of
Very
their
romantic, a very romantic baggage that is part colonial, okay, and part nationalism. So they could take their pick. One of the statements that I like to make is that Filipinos start behaving more nationalistically when they're here in the United States than they ever did when they were in the Philippines.
Well, look, I have to agree with you there, because how many times do people say, well, back home?
Well, that's right.
You mean Stockton? No, back home.
How did they refer to white people?
Yeah.
I grew up with Filipinos, including their children younger than me, right? Different generation, referring to white people as Americans. My sister married an American guy.
Right.
And I have to ask them, what color? What nationality? What ethnicity? Give me something. But an American guy. I'm an American guy.
Yeah. Well, that's true. This is part of the, people say, well, what does this have to do with history? Well, it has everything to do with history, because you're trying to understand what's happening today. You look back at the past, and you just brought up this idea with the Katipunan, and how when people come here, how they feel, and some examples of Filipino Americans.
They sold out. Aguinaldo sold out, and he lived into the 80s, man. I mean.
Well, look, this is one of the things about Aguinaldo. You very rarely hear about him, except as he was the guerrilla, he was the rebel, he was the first president, he was the George Washington of the Philippines, and that's all the paragraph in the U.S. American history
Which
books
is horrible.
you get. You don't get the story, and yet if you get that much, if you get an inch of Filipino history in the U.S. American history text from the Philippine-U.S. War, that's what you get.
Yep.
Then that's what you live with, until your dying day, and unless you hear other alternate, they're not necessarily alternate views, they're just other aspects of the truth that represent the full truth.
Let's just say a more complete picture, a more complete factual picture, and they don't get that. And you won't get that except usually in an ethnic studies environment.
Well, that's
usually
true.
That's where you get it. It's either that or if you're doing advanced studies at one of the big universities.
And it's true, unless you do ethnic studies, Asian American studies, Filipino American studies, when Filipino American studies, or where Filipino American studies is available, you don't get the complete truth unless you do it on your own.
Right.
And this is, I'm glad you're one of the first academics to come on since this happened. And this is a Donald Trump proposal. He wants to get rid of sensitivity training. He wants to get rid of talking about
racial sensitivity training.
He wants to get rid of critical race theory and this idea that
they're teaching people to hate our country.
Right, teaching people to be racist, which I wondered. Now this isn't anti-Trump. I'm just being anti this proposal, which he can put on through executive
That's nice
order.
and indirect, Emil. How convenient.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying that I'm saying that he could do this by executive order, and part of what an historical perspective should have, it should be complete, like we were talking about. Part of what a conversation on history should be is it should be complete and enlighten us. We're here. This is Filipino American History Month, and we should talk about
well, let's keep following it up. Let's keep following it up. There were people from the Katipunan elite families, just one or two, who came to the United States right at the time the revolution was going on, and right at the time the United States took over control of the Philippines, or at least they were exploiting the Philippines militaristically at first, right?
Like 1905, 1906?
Even earlier, 1896, 97, 98, they came over as business people.
Oh, so this is what, along with the, they sent Taft over to be governor.
Yes.
And and McKinley was president, I believe. And so now
eventually,
eventually. And so now, but McKinley was the chief imperialist. But there were some Filipinos. Now, what were they called? They were the businessmen. They weren't the Ilustrados. Were they? They weren't the Ilustrados.
Yeah, they were.
Oh, those were called. All right.
Yeah, they were. They were members of the Ilustrados class.
So the Ilustrados come here. So if there's some Filipinos who say, "Yeah, my father goes back to, 1890s. My Filipino family goes back to the 1890s."
That's true. But
not mine. I'm just saying if someone,
but there are two.
bragging,
I understand the reference, but there were two groups of people. But it was the businessmen, and very frequently they brought their families, and of course they had attendance for their children.
Right.
And the reason I balked is because I was remember Mr. Chizon's book, right? About
Alex Chizon,
about Lola. Yeah. Anyway, so they brought people like that with them. So there was a very small contingent of poor people. I wouldn't even call them working class, a working poor, perhaps, near slave relations. So that's the kind of people that were coming over at the time. Then there's the opening of the military relationship, right? Open recruitment by the U.S. Navy of Filipinos at Sangley Point. Okay, that begins in the first 6 years. 1906. Okay, first 8 years. So thousands of Filipinos, right, came through that. They also established the Philippine Constabulary, which was a wing of the US Army. So we have this strong military relationship. Okay. We got Filipinos now coming to the academies here in the United States. Okay. Especially after the First World War. Okay. We have Filipinos who had fought in American uniforms in the First World War, arriving in the United States by the 1918, 1919, 1920. The Caballeros de Dimasalang, right, buy their first piece of property up on Broadway. GO, Gran Oriente, right, buys their property in the South of Market, all in the early 20s. Okay, so here we have a representation of a kind of class vision, a class-based vision, and it's an upper class-based vision of what a Filipino should be. What's it based on? The image of Jose Rizal. These are Rizalista organizations, right? Okay. They become the elite semi-secret leadership of the Filipino American community. So the way they vote and the candidates that they support, the kind of people that they're willing to give money to, right? Because Filipinos couldn't vote.
Right.
Right. Until some were offered citizenship as a result of being veterans of the U.S. military, right? So there's the relationship. So it's colonial all the way. It's colonial all the way. In other words, it's pro-American all the way. Okay. President Garcia came out and made statements that the best place for Filipinos to be, this is after the Second World War, is to be in the wake of the United States of America. The wake, not meaning the funeral, but the wake, the area between the waves, right?
Not the wave.
By the passing of a ship. Yes. Yeah.
Not the wave, but the wake, which is smooth, and you just float along. Right.
You just cruise right on behind them.
And so
there's leadership for the Philippines that influences Filipino Americans, right? And you know, my grand uncle, who was the guy who started the Philippines Mail, right? I have colleagues that got that wrong. You know, they say that it got started by a couple of other people, Aguda particularly, which is partially true. But the reason they see that as them as the founders of Philippines Mail is because they're only looking back to the 30s. You know, I have the evidence of the Ditto Master, right? Legal size version.
Was it a Ditto Master?
1921, and it's volume 1, right? You know, so you know, we'll deal with that later.
Once again, the belief
he was a diehard Republican. He was a diehard Republican, and he used to stay at our house. You know, Democratic household, both of my parents, and I used to argue with him all the time. All the way up into high school, I would argue with this guy.
Dan, here's the interesting thing. This Filipino American history, along the time of the Philippine-U.S. War and the colonial period, because they were still fighting, even though they were colonies. There were some fighters who were still fighting, and they did not sell out.
Yes,
they didn't. So let's make it clear: there were some who were still fighting, and that was the U.S.-Philippine War was a long war. The Philippine-U.S. War or Philippine-American War
went all the way almost into
much longer.
Yeah.
But do we ever get this part of Filipino American history anywhere? Anywhere unless you are really hyper ethnic studies and really looking into this.
Well, you were one of 2 or 3 people who were regular contributors to widely circulated Filipino newspapers. Okay. And there were people like Rodis, right?
Rodis, yes.
Who had a regular column that featured references back to history. And while I disagreed with a lot of his political analysis of contemporary circumstances, his citation of history was very factual. Okay.
Yeah.
His critical perspective I might disagree with, but his citation of history was very factual. So there was also, I'm trying to remember his name, but there was a writer in the Philippines, a professor, who also did revisionist history when he get criticized, but his perspective regularly featured in weekly papers in the Philippines, and they were accurate. His positions were all factually based and very accurate. So there have been opportunities for people to get educated about this. But at the colloquial level, right, down here on the ground, old beliefs persist.
Yeah.
Old
And,
beliefs persist.
and this is why it's important to talk about it, because we rarely get this perspective. I'm glad you mentioned Riddell, because I'm glad to call him a colleague. We've written for a number of publications at the same time, and I'd like to get him on this week in Filipino American history to talk about his perspective, because especially during History Month. But I think the critical thing about what you have been talking about these last, 20 minutes or so, is the fact that when you think about where Filipino Americans are now, we don't, we did not just become this way. We are not this way
Exactly.
for no reason at all.
You need to look at the pattern. You need to look at trends, right? And you need to look at the pattern. And our pattern has been that we're very much split, not necessarily along class lines, because the vast majority of Filipinos before the Second World War were working class or working poor, okay, the vast majority. And after the Second World War, because of the economic disparity between the wealthy and the working class was much less than it is now. Today's disparity is ridiculous, right? You got people.
But people were aspirational then,
and the system allowed them to act on their aspirations. My parents moved from the poverty of the projects, to the middle class,
right?
And were able to buy even a second home out in the burbs and live the rest of their lives in.
But Dan, your father was also a recipient by virtue of the military.
Yes, GI Bill.
And so people who were able to get that, people don't see the GI Bill as a form of affirmative action, but
it
was for the early, Filipinos. Otherwise,
except for African Americans. African Americans are very limited.
Well, this is one of the disparities that exists and still exists. But when you go back to the 1920s, like the museum, for example, we like to talk about the ag history. We like to talk about how the workers come off the boats from San Francisco, as Ron Takaki describes in his Strangers from a Different Shore. They got off the boats. They took yellow cabs over the Altamont into the valley to work for 10 cents an hour.
Right.
And that was where the Filipinos took the jobs, took the women, and experienced the Jim Crow experience of Filipinos in California in the 1930s.
And you can repeat that pattern all up and down the West Coast. Okay.
Yeah.
So everywhere from San Diego and the Imperial Valley, all the way up to the Central Valley, right? And on the West Coast, right? Santa Maria, Nipomo, all that. I mean, there are Filipino organizations that were started in 1918 in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you repeat that all the way, that description that you just made of people landing in the port and then heading for the ag areas and taking a cab to do it, all the way up to Seattle. Okay. And then from Seattle into Alaska because of the cannery industry, right?
And of course, October, one of the other reasons why October is Filipino American History Month is the birth month of Larry Itliong, who exemplified going up and down from the fields in California all the way up to Alaska. He was an Eliscaro, lost 2 fingers.
Right.
Seven-finger Larry.
Seven-finger Larry, yeah.
And, we'll talk about him later in the month. But, when you talk about Filipinos coming over at the time of the colonial period to America, the Ilustrados, and how they saw themselves as elites, there is this contradiction between the elites who were embraced America and were embraced back, and the Filipinos who came, like my dad, in the 20s and the 30s.
Mine too.
Who were, they were nationals, American nationals, but were not embraced. They were not embraced by society. And which,
well, they were the targets of a specific type of racism that began against the Chinese.
Right.
And then was visited against the Japanese and then was visited against the
Indian,
Asian Indians and
Indian.
us, and
Yeah.
us. So
Yeah, you got to go back to 1898, the Exclusion Act, Chinese
right,
exclusion, and then essentially the 1934, the Tidings McDuffie Act, which was
right,
essentially the Filipino Exclusion Act. They don't
right.
call it that, but it was the Filipino Exclusion Act.
Yeah. 1934. Yeah.
And you know,
But
all those, and you know,
less than 5% of the Filipinos who were offered that ever went back.
right,
It
right.
was
It was
So
totally voluntary, but
yes, it was.
I know some Filipinos who actually they saw Filipinos coming in, because if you came in 1934, if you were a scared Filipino and wanted to go back home, you had to go through Angel Island to go back home. And some
That's
people
right.
were coming here from the Philippines still,
Yeah,
like
they're crossing
they
each
were
other's
in
path.
Angel Island. Like, what? You're going back? I'm coming here. What do I? I mean, this is
That
the truth.
you ought to do that as a one-man show. That should be a one-man
Yeah,
show, man.
I am. That's it.
That would be so good. I swear.
I
That,
have, I
I would
have
pay big money. I pay big money for
a big
that.
man. I have a relative who is in that situation where, oh my God, you know what am I
What
coming?
the hell
So,
is going on? Yeah.
but that,
Yeah. Well, see, the
you know,
Philippine government actually started warning people not to come. The
yeah,
Philippine government started warning people not to come. But geez, you had set up this waterfall, right,
yeah,
of
yeah,
exodus from from the Philippines, and the movies made it worse, right? They got the
yeah,
Saudis and everybody, and there was Mae West had a Filipino driver. I mean,
yeah. Well,
Caterina
look,
Garcia
May,
was
Mae
was
West.
getting
If
some.
Mae West is the reason why, I don't know. She had Filipino drivers. Her father was a boxer. She loved Filipino boxers. She
Yeah,
hired them to be security and her drivers.
right.
And Mae West, that movie uh, uh, where she says, "Why don't you come up and see me sometime?"
See you sometime.
She's talking to Cary Grant. She's
Right.
talking to Cary Grant, and I know there must have been tens of hundreds, dozens of Filipinos who went to see that movie, and they saw themselves as Cary Grant, with the suit and the hat. Because that's the way my dad dressed in the 30s. That's the way everyone had a
Oh
fedora.
man, yeah,
Everyone had
custom clothes, man.
yeah,
Custom clothes because they couldn't fit. They didn't make good stuff in boys' sizes.
yeah.
So they got stuff was tailored, hand tailored.
I know. I'm my studio is my closet, and I look at my suits that I haven't worn in years. They're nothing like the suits that I saw my dad, and he was just a cook. My dad was a cook, but he always had the finest suits and ties and all these hats. And
Please
so
do not say just a cook. You could
He was
say
not,
he was a
he was
cook.
not, he was not just, he was a union cook. He was
Okay,
a local
okay,
two union
all
cook
right.
in San Francisco.
Well,
Anyway,
listen. The reason I'm sensitive to that is you got to remember, even though they didn't make chef because of racism, right? They
right.
were very, very frequently the single most important cook in that
Yeah.
kitchen.
Yeah.
I had at least 3 real relatives and two fictive uncles
Yeah.
that all worked in the kitchens of the best restaurants in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Okay, and I need to tell that story, at least a couple of short stories about that experience. But
Well,
you know,
that's a good one. Look, my father was the same way. I mean, he worked in the good restaurants and the bad restaurants,
yeah,
wherever the union sent him. But
yeah,
for my uncle Joe and my father, my uncle Joe worked at a place where he must have worked in the dessert section, because he was a master at baked Alaska. And whenever I would come back home from college, he said, "Oh, you want to come back and eat my baked Alaska? I did me baked Alaska."
hell yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, it's like how many kids coming, 17-year-olds in college, are eating baked Alaska because to celebrate their birth, So
I
and my
learned how to
dad,
make eggs. I learned how to cook eggs Benedict
oh yeah,
with crab oil. This
yeah,
this Uncle Joe used crab oil,
yeah,
to,
that's
to
funny.
keep the eggs from sticking, and the guy it was fantastic. So I always thought you had to cook them with crab oil. You
See,
know?
every Filipino has forebears that go back to the 20s and 30s, and where the choices were you either pick the vegetables or you cook the vegetables. And if they were cooks, they had some recipes.
Oh
They
yeah.
they came with some recipes.
Oh yeah.
So this is we talk. So eventually we talk about Filipino history. It's important because you can't. I think one of the points is you can't get away from when you talk about the current day, when you talk about how Filipinos are today, how the Filipino American community is today, you can't really go far from our history to explain. Our history
Well,
explains where
let's
we're from.
continue the connection. Let's continue the connection. You got Filipinos now leaving the Philippines in the 20s and 30s, right? Pre-World War II, right?
Yeah.
And they developed very strong critical anti-colonial perspectives. Their leadership did. And that same leadership does what to cope with American racism? They form unions.
Right.
And they were victimized and targeted by the local police, by National Guard, especially in Hawaii, right? Two major attacks on Filipinos organizers in Hawaii. They suffered exile. They're kicked out of the state. Okay.
And we're talking about what, 50s?
40s, 30s and 40s. Manlapit,
40s.
Pablo Manlapit, remember that?
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
FLU, the Filipino Labor Union.
Yeah.
And some of those people come to the coast, the United States, the Gonzales brothers specifically, right?
Oh, yeah.
And they begin to organize. And so in the 20s, late 20s and early 30s, you got these people who would eventually form Ukapawa up in the Seattle area, and then that would become affiliated with the ILWU, and they would have their own chapter, right? Their own.
And then from that,
Local 37, their own local.
And
So that's the other side, right? So you have the resistance in the Philippines now corresponding to the left, a radical left, right? Because unions were set upon. They hired thugs to beat up on people and threaten their families and all that stuff. Okay, the KKK would come out and blow up the front of the Stockton. When was it? The GO. Whose headquarters were those that got blown up? I forgot. Remember that the dynamite thing?
And that was in the 30s, I think.
In Stockton.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is that you have a left-leaning element, but it's a minority of the Filipino American community. The majority of the Filipino American community did the same kind of developmental pattern that other ethnic groups did when they come in as new immigrants, right? They want to keep their heads down, lay low, like so many of my uncles would say, dance to the music. That's the music that's here. You dance to the music.
I like that. Dance to the music. They were like Sly Stone fans before Sly Stone. So the dance to the music.
Kids these days, they don't know Sly Stone, but when you play one of the songs, they recognize the songs. They just don't know who to credit.
Yeah, because it's been sampled to death by a hip hop artist.
Yeah, everybody. That's right.
But no, that's an excellent point though. That Filipinos go along to get along, dance to the music, bahala na, right? And
that's the majority.
But it explains if you're thinking, oh God, there's a lot of dichotomies, or maybe dichotomy is two, so there can only be one dichotomy, 1 and 2. But there is a dichotomy in the Filipino community between, I guess some people would say, the woke and the unwoke, or the elitists and the non-elitists, or the working class and the elitists, or essentially the haves and the have-nots. And as you pointed out, we are now in a realm where inequality is, it's not
the disparity between the upper class and the rest of America is fantastic. I mean, it's unbelievable, frankly. But people let it happen. People let that happen.
It's so unbelievable that if you put up a mirror, the United States in its inequality is like the Philippines in its inequality.
Yeah.
I mean, in many ways, what we have post Marcos, post colonial. I mean, I've been to the Philippines I can't say back home, even though my parents would always say, "Oh, when you go back home." Once I went to in 1983 and I saw it, and you
And
go,
it went on TV,
yeah,
sometimes live.
yeah. But when you see it, when you see that inequality, you say there is no middle class in the Philippines. There, uh,
Very small,
there,
very
there,
small.
there was no middle class when I was there in '83. Either you're in a lean-to or you're in Malacanang, and the people who weren't in lean-tos thought they were elites, and the
Yeah,
vast
I
majority.
remember your trip, and I remember you were visiting people in Tondo,
Tondo,
and and Smoky Mountain was still on, right? It
yeah,
was still burning.
yeah,
So yeah, my first trip since the '60s was in '87,
yeah.
and even then, my parents were saying, you're on that list from the '70s.
Wow.
And and I said, nah, I'm not worried about it. I said they got a bunch of people's name wrong, so I don't think it matters much, But
Well,
anyway,
yeah, but the
the,
thing is that the picture of the reflection of the Philippines on transposed on America now, you wouldn't have thought it in the past when you thought, oh well, we're moving toward equality here in America. We're moving toward,
yeah,
the great
yeah,
society. We're moving
yeah, yeah,
toward,
yeah,
and now look at where we are. It's like,
yeah.
uh,
Well, see, the older generation Filipinos. Let's go back to our timeline, right? We're into the '40s now,
yeah,
and the more nationalistic Filipinos were fighting in the '30s for Philippine independence, and they got the deal,
yeah,
right? So 1935, the deal signed, and they're supposed to get independence in '45, but the World War II interferes with that. Okay. Um, what did the United States give to the Philippines? Nothing good. Essentially, the only thing that the Philippines got that was any good from the United States, because they gave Americans the rights to behave just like Filipino citizens when it came to owning and running property in the Philippines. But they didn't give reciprocal rights to Filipinos in the United States
no,
to
I
do the
mean
same.
the
So
Filipino elites, they couldn't vote.
yeah,
The Filipino
yeah,
elites were still brown passport holders, so they
right.
couldn't vote. They weren't citizens.
Yeah, yeah. And Filipinos, again, from the left, um, had made arguments and got support from far left members of Congress, right, to push for Philippine independence, and not only that, the right for Filipinos to become citizens. Some of those refused, even though they came out of the Second World War as veterans and had then the choice to become citizens, right? They
Right.
refused that until the United States agreed about a year later, I think '46. I got to check on that. But they agreed that Philippines could naturalize. So it wasn't until after all of that action from the left that
Yeah.
Filipinos began to receive somewhat more equitable treatment in the United States. And
Wow.
so you got to
Yeah.
look at it from that perspective. So there's been an increasing development of people who are more thoughtful and less emotional reactionary, right? And more thoughtful and critical about what's really happening in American society. Okay. And so the contradictions between the racist reality of the United States was brought clearly into focus, right, during the McCarthy era, right, when Eugene McCarthy was fake newsing it to death, right, that there were communists everywhere.
Joseph McCarthy.
Joseph, I'm sorry, Eugene was the guy that lost the election.
Eugene McCarthy was the pacifist who was running for.
And yeah,
He got
unfortunately,
beat up by
really
McGovern, and then McGovern got.
extremely weak sauce campaign, man. But anyway, okay, that's Democrats though.
Yeah.
That's Democrats, man.
Yeah.
You
So
want
Joseph
wokeness?
McCarthy going after the communists.
So Joe, crazy ass Joe McCarthy. Anyway, so he goes out and puts out all kind of fake news, twists the entire society way over to the right. It becomes a very popular thing to do until, of course, he makes charges against the U.S. Army. Not real smart. And so military turns against him. Everybody starts turning against him. Other Republicans turn against him, and he leaves. And then he dies. But guess who runs for his seat? His wife. And she wins. So that shows you the continuity of that kind of Republican candidate, right?
Right. Yeah.
So this is right after the Second World War. Then you get the Arizona senator, right, whose name is connected with the picture of an atomic bomb explosion. Okay.
Oh, who's that? Who's that?
Goldwater.
Oh, Goldwater. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Goldwater. Yeah. Barry Goldwater.
Okay. Barry, his Barryness. Okay. And that's during the escalation of the Vietnam War.
Now, here's the thing about Goldwater. Even though he was a hawk, Republicans were different in those days.
Yes.
They were hawkish. They were,
but they had honor. They had honor and integrity.
And this is the thing when people talk about, oh, you know, Republican Party, the party of Lincoln. Well,
no, not really.
It was sort of, but politics is always evolving. But where the Republican Party is today is so much different from where the Republican Party was in the 60s with Goldwater,
and even the early 70s, yeah,
in the 70s, and also with Lincoln. I did a whole thing about how Lincoln was, the Republican Party was one of many parties that was trying to figure out how to deal with this expanding America and how to keep slavery from expanding. Very complex history, but you can't say that it was the same Republican Party as it is today. And
no, the Democratic Party was the racist party. It was the party of the South.
Right.
And that was largely because of the Civil War, right? Yeah. And all that. So the Republican Party always had, some historians are now reviewing this as well publicly, right? Always had this extreme right element, okay? And so you got to understand that that's always there, just like the conservative element is always there with us as Filipinos. We have constant immigration from the Philippines. The Filipinos who come to the United States are expecting to be able to, one, the economic freedom, to be able to live and work and improve on their circumstances from what their life was like back in the Philippines. The few people who go back are usually people who are in the upper middle class, that small middle class and upper middle class that you referred to earlier when you said there was no middle class. But anyway, so the point is that here in the United States, we still have that same dynamic. We always have a conservative element within our community, right? The young woman who runs as a Republican from San Mateo, right? Trying to unseat
Jackie Spear.
Yeah, Jackie Spear's seat.
I think I met that woman once at a Filipino community gathering. I mean,
she's an Osmeña.
Yeah,
she's an Osmeña, and to put that in perspective, the main street, which is a double boulevard with an island in the middle, that runs right up literally to the stairs of City Hall in Cebu, one of the biggest cities in the Philippines, right? It's Osmeña Boulevard. Okay, so her grandfather, I believe it was either grandfather or great grandfather, probably was a candidate for Philippine presidency.
Right.
Okay, so you got to put all that stuff in perspective. But she unfortunately ran straight up as a Republican, and I was wondering who the hell advised her to do that. In Northern California, especially in the Bay Area, and for a seat that partially trends into San Francisco County itself and then runs through San Mateo. That's Leo Ryan's former seat, right? And so, she would be much better off if she ran as an independent, right? But Quentin Kopp, right? Real conservative dude. He gave up on Republican and became independent. Way back in the 80s. Okay.
Maybe before that. I remember Quentin Kopp as a local San Francisco politician. Then he went statewide,
right?
And met him, and actually
John Molinari, lifetime Republican,
right.
And he changed his affiliation right before the election. He was competing against Agnos, right? And in my opinion, from a totally personal perspective, I thought he was a better candidate. I
like Molinari too. I mean, now we're talking San Francisco politics.
Yes, we are.
But from that group, we get Feinstein, we get
Well, guess who went and campaigned in Stockton on a regular basis? In fact, when Professor Mabalon and I were doing some research at the San Francisco Public Library in the San Francisco collection of photographs, there's a whole section on politicians' photographs taken by journalists and also by their own photographers. And while we're flipping through some of the politicians, we were on Moscone, right? I had a file on Moscone.
Right.
And we open up a page, and guess what? There's a picture there of him talking to a group of Filipinos that look like, you know, how agricultural workers from the 50s and 60s dressed, and they were dressed like that. But Moscone was not running for statewide office until the 60s and 70s, right? So it had to be that time period. We looked very carefully, and both of us, she shuddered. I can tell you, she shuddered. I said, damn, that guy looks just like your dad from behind.
Yeah.
And so, we freaked. And so she flips the page, and it was her dad.
Wow.
You know, so
Ernie.
here's a Moscone, liberal San Francisco guy. And when he starts prepping to run statewide, right, he does the visitation, and he paid attention to Filipinos, even though we were getting some attention because our immigration level was so high, right? All of a sudden we had floods of thousands, tens of thousands of Filipinos coming into San Francisco per year, right, after 1965. And so we had a lot of potential, but those weren't voters yet, right?
Yeah.
But we had a lot of potential. Okay, who gets recruited to do, in the early 1970s, we have lots of Filipino teachers, post-1965, some of them post-55, in that period between 55 and 65. But the vast majority of them are coming in after 65. Well-educated.
That's because of the Immigration Act. They couldn't.
1965. We started with it.
Come in.
And it was bipartisan.
Yeah.
The Democrats and the Republicans, did agreed on that, but for different reasons.
Well, but here's the thing about the 1965 Immigration Act, and we're coming along to an anniversary of that.
Yes.
That it was passed. If you want to see, well, why were there so many Filipinos post 65? It wasn't just because of Marcos, because Marcos didn't really come on until like 72. He declared martial law.
Yeah, not only that, he tried to put a halter on that. He wanted to slow down immigration. Yeah.
Right, but the key was the bipartisan nature of the Immigration Act of 1965, which allowed the immigration of Filipinos and other people who they had these quotas, these illegal or these discriminatory quotas. The Filipinos, especially, I don't think there were more than a handful of Filipinos that were allowed between the 30s and 1965. But because of the 65 law, the floodgates were open. It still took a while to get through, 5-10 years, because there was a massive number of people who wanted to immigrate. But that was the beginning of that wave, 1965.
Yeah, between the Second World War and 65, it was either 105 or 115 Filipinos per year. That's all. Yeah. That's all. So it's a trickle, The way to come in, though, was as a non-immigrant, as a student. And a lot of the people who were able to stay, right, came in as students, finished off their education, and decided to stay. And it was relatively easy back then. I remember it was like filling out a couple of pages of paperwork. And as long as you didn't commit crimes or anything like that, you could convert from a visa holder to permanent residency.
Yeah.
And a lot of people did that. And guess what? A lot of them were that 4% of the American nursing profession, right?
Right.
Another small percentage was teachers. So we got two groups, dominant female, right, categories of profession. The teachers were being treated like shit. Oops, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Treated like doo-doo because they had accents. Mm-hmm. So the accent issue was used as a method of keeping them out of tenure-bearing positions. And so they were forevermore classified as temp subs. And you know how temp sub teachers get taught, they get treated. I mean, there's wholesale rebellion and goofing off in the classroom. And so they were not given the appropriate level of respect. However, they had strong teaching credentials. They had the degrees. So there was a movement towards bilingual education. And that movement was concentrated in areas that had strong immigrant populations. California,
Bilingual?
obviously.
Really, Philip? They were going to teach Tagalog in California schools?
They were going to allow Filipinos or anybody who was proficient in Filipino language to teach bilingual courses. So this is the route, right? You create this area called bilingual education to be able to address the needs of new immigrant arrivals, okay? And that's transitioning. There are two cycles, or there's two directions. That's transitioning. One, the earlier established direction was ESL. Remember that? English as a second language, right? And then there was immersion. And so that's the extreme end, right? Immersion. But bilingual education said, we want to teach children in the language they're most proficient in and transition them to full English learners, right? That's the key. And the argument was based on 14th Amendment equal protection argument, which was getting a lot of, in a Warren court, right? Liberal court was getting a lot of support, not only at that level, but also at lower federal district court levels, like the Ninth Circuit, which is right here
in San
Francisco, okay? So now you've got a program that's going to hire teachers who are proficient in an immigrant language, right? A dominant immigrant language, right? And they're going to be able to be hired full time. And that's how not only that, there was a federal grant program available so that these teachers could, if they didn't have a master's yet, they could not only get a bilingual cross-cultural education credential, plus a few units to get a master's degree too. So that enabled them economically within the system. Okay.
And so that enabled immigration. It enabled the rise of a
class
Filipino
movement,
American
class development, middle class. Yeah. And so
our good friend Rod McLeod's mother was a teacher.
Principal. She became a principal. One of the first two in San Francisco. The other was Dr. Sofia Prudenciado. Yeah, a lot of this stuff is coming back, boy. It's jarring my memory, dude.
Yeah, but anyway. But you know, the thing is, this is the building blocks of, you know, we look from the perspective of San Francisco, the museums in Stockton. You could see this very thing replicated in all the major Filipino centers in the state, right?
Right.
You know, for every McLeod, Principal McLeod, there was one in LA, I would imagine.
Yeah.
And it's all because there was
Seattle got a lot of people early because they developed really powerful political foundation because of ILWU, Local 37 in great part. Other affiliated unions as well. But once again, what I'm pointing to is the left of center element, right? And so there was an attempt to have a bipartisan organization in San Francisco. It's called FAPA, Filipino American Political Organization.
I remember that. Was that Alex Escalmado?
He was one of the people that did FAPA, but the competing bi-weekly or fortnightly, I guess it's called, was Mabuhay Republic. Remember that?
Oh yeah. So you're really talking about
Justice Deva.
Justice Deva.
Yes.
And isn't it funny that as you mentioned that, this is another bit of personal Filipino history. Justice Deva ran a money transfer service.
Yes, he did. Travel agency and money transfer. And
he ran the paper, Mabuhay Republic.
Yep.
Plus he ran the money service.
Right.
And I remember, and I believe it was in the Flood Building in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Which was right next to the Woolworth. And so this is where my mother would take my sister and I on Sundays, we would go to, or not Sundays, but just on a regular day, we would go to Esteva's office and give money.
Right.
And with the money left over, we'd go sit in the Woolworth counter.
Did they have pizza yet?
They had pizza. Yes, they
Yeah,
had pizza because
by
they
the slice.
had,
Lousy pizza by our standards, but yeah,
yeah,
it was
lousy
cool.
pizza,
It was
right?
new.
But it had green onions, right? Little
Yeah,
chopped green
yeah,
onions.
it was new. They just had the one with the ground up salami, maybe it's meat,
Yeah.
and then the
But
cheese pizza,
but
right?
see, this is a thing that if you mention it to other Filipino kids of a certain generation, they'll say, "Oh yeah, we went to Woolworths. Oh yeah, we
The
went to
competitor was across the street, Cress.
oh Crest, yeah,
Yes,
Crest, the Crest.
yeah.
Oh,
They,
there was a Crest in Stockton, and in fact, the FANHS Museum in Stockton is in a Newberry building.
and that was where the Cress used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. No, anyway, it's interesting. You know, we tell these stories about Filipino American history, and I really appreciate you coming on to talk about the history, but also the personal stories. And it all, as I say, we talk about it because it gives us a chance to see or to see how history helps us explain where we are now. And when you like ask about the divisions, when you ask about, well, why do these people think they're, elitists, or why are they
Right, right.
Republican, or why are they, why are these people working class, or why, the unions, why is the union such an important thing?
Well,
The
it got
union,
hurt really badly during it actually began. The union movements got hurt at the end of the Nixon period when Mr. Ford had taken over for Richard Nixon through the Carter period, and then got really sacked by the Ronald Reagan.
oh yeah, the Patco strike, right? The
Well, that was just the beginning. That was just the beginning, right?
right.
And then a lot of the big unions made all the wrong moves. You had so many Americans suffering economically. The so-called Reagan recovery favored everybody from the upper middle class on up, right?
Right.
And then the unions went out and did strikes, right? At the same time, in the 70s, there were two different oil embargoes. Remember that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Couldn't even get food on the shelves. The Safeways were empty.
And gas prices.
Oh man, really bad.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, after being like 39 cents. Actually, that was high. It used to be cheaper than that, but I remember
oh yeah, no, I used to make it on like 50 cents and go to Sacramento and come back. Yeah.
hard to believe.
It was 25 cents a gallon, for
Yeah.
regular. Right?
Yeah, and then when it went to 99 cents, oh my
Oh
God.
my God.
So, all right.
It's
So
true.
this brings us back a little ways.
Yeah, a little bit. But anyway, so Stockton starts receiving, okay, even though Nixon was a Republican, he did not dismantle in the entirety of affirmative action that began right during the at the end of the Johnson administration. Okay, so it didn't. That was part of the Great Society. You brought that up earlier, but it was also in the midst of the two things: foreign interests, Vietnam War. Right. That was the international issue. Domestic issue. Guess what? Civil rights. Right. Race. Equality, justice in the courts, right? Equal access, all that stuff. Okay, so all of that's happening in the early 70s. Nixon was a moderate.
Yeah.
He did not dismantle any of that stuff. He also did deals with the Soviets, and he did deals with the Chinese. Remember that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Nixon in China, of course. I mean,
Yeah,
you look at where the
activity.
Republican Party is then and where it is now,
Oh my God.
and how, I think a lot of people who aren't Republicans would say, "Oh, I like those." Nixon, a Nixon Republican, despite the fact that Watergate has tainted him. If you look at his policies, I remember being in Washington as a reporter when Nixon died, and having to do an obit on Nixon, and he started the EPA.
Yeah.
People weren't just being nice to him by lauding him for certain things, even though at that point, Watergate had, the fear or,
Well, he
what,
ran on a law and order,
yeah, right. Just like,
foundation, and so they were cracking down, and the major impetus for that was against the protests against the war, and then
right,
the other one was the merger of the civil rights movement with the anti-war movement, right? And that became huge.
right,
So
right.
everybody got scared when Carlos the Smith did the thing, right?
At the
At the
Olympics.
Mexican Olympics.
Yeah,
And so it drew international attention to the Panthers.
right,
It drew international attention to Malcolm X, right?
right.
And that also stoked the fears of white folks,
Yeah,
and not only white folks. I mean, it also stoked the fears of conservative people of color, including some black folks.
yeah,
So this was a very conflictual period. Nixon did some really good things. There were intelligent moves from a preserve and protect capitalism perspective. Really good moves. And then on the equity side, the civil rights side, he also did some good things there, right? But keep in mind that was possible largely because of the Warren Court. The Warren Court was going to upheld any of those things that got challenged from the right.
there were checks. There were, I mean, you see how politics worked back then, and you see how you can have diverse views and yet still people you absolutely hated and people you absolutely love, but there was no gridlock. People,
That's right.
they got along. I mean, and you look at that 65 Immigration Act and you say, oh my God, uh, now the only thing you'd have that kind of bipartisan support for might be for the naming of a post office or something. It's just, it's like incredible that.
I don't know. The Republicans want to shut the post offices down,
Oh,
dude.
that's right. Now, of course, it's true. Right now the
They
post
want to
office.
privatize everything.
Well, see, things have changed, and now it brings us back. I mean, we're not. I'd like to carry on in our timeline discussion a little later on in the month, and
Okay.
I'll have you back to talk more about history. But as far as where we are right now, the things that
Well,
you
last
talked
time around,
about,
right?
yeah,
27, according to the AAPI
yeah,
survey done in 2016,
yeah.
27% of Filipinos voted for Trump.
Right. Well, actually, let's look at where we are now in
Okay.
terms of the 2020 AAPI data. Once again, it's run by Karthik Ramakrishnan and Janelle Wong, and they put out an Asian American voter survey every presidential cycle. So in 2020, here is where the question is. The question was thinking about the upcoming November election for president. If the election were being held today, who would you be inclined to vote for? And Asian Americans, 54 Biden, 30 Trump.
Right.
15.
That's overall. And for
That's
the
overall.
Filipinos,
The Filipinos are 52 Biden, 34 Trump.
there you go.
Yeah.
That's worse than it's 2016, right?
Yeah. Well, 52 Biden though, and then but the real
That's true. It's over 50. Yeah.
yeah, the real Biden or the real Trump supporters are the Vietnamese. 36 Biden, 48 48% for Trump. And
Yeah.
Filipinos are number 2 among the ethnic groups in this 2020 survey. The Asian American Voter Survey, by the way, is, like I said, I bring it up because no one in any mainstream poll really has enough of a sampling size to say how many, what Asian Americans think, period. The sample
Yeah.
size is too low. Now, some people say, well, this sample size was only like 248 Filipinos. Yes, but enough so statistically you can make a claim like a plus or minus 7 to 10%, on this interethnic thing. But on the broader question, I think it's like 2% on the Asian American number. So it gives us a sense though about where the Filipino American voters, these are voters,
Yeah.
and and they were questioned between July and September.
Yeah, I think
of
the
this year.
end date was September 15th.
Yeah, and so 52 Biden, 34 Trump, still second highest Asian American group for Trump, which is really Trumpy, but that's in line with the things that we've talked about historically.
Yeah, but the important consideration is in spite of everything that's happened.
Is well, this was the last vote of this tally here was in September. If it were taken today, what do you think? Would it have any difference at all? The
Very
Philippines?
little, very
Yeah,
little. Even though the man has come down with COVID-19,
yeah. Well,
very little difference.
here's another question. The AAPI data poll asked Donald Trump favorability, and of course, the favorability 35%, very favorable, 18% somewhat favorable. That's the highest that's the Vietnamese. So that's like 53%. I think I just went over that. Yeah, 53%.
All right. Have you spoken to any of your Vietnamese friends or colleagues about why that's so?
I think a lot of them is because of the war, because they came across loyalty to Republicans, basically. Older,
But Nixon got credit for ending the Vietnam War when actually he stalled the ending of the Vietnam
well,
War.
that's probably the case, but a lot of the old time, military leaders who are here now and their families, very Republican, very loyal. And I think there's some of that spillover, and there might be a generational gap between Vietnamese, younger Vietnamese who were born here,
Right.
because there is that potential for a generation gap now. And I would say that's why you might see some dissension among the ranks in the Vietnamese community. But
Right.
now
Right.
the second largest group in terms of Donald Trump favorability is Filipino,
Well, the
25.
reason I ask about the Vietnamese is to compare reasons, because a
Oh,
lot of the Filipinos who favor Trump say it's the economy.
yeah.
Vietnamese say the same thing, and that's also again mis to hurt the economy. Trump's positions, especially on an international level,
Mhm.
have done more damage to the economy than have helped the economy. So the economy has succeeded in spite of Donald Trump and his policies. Okay, but that's not what people want to believe. Now, why do they believe that? Because Republicans are always reputed to do what? Handle business better, right? They're dyed-in-the-wool capitalists. Therefore, they handle it better. What I use in my classes is comparative data that covers 6 different presidential cycles. In every single presidential cycle, right, there is a promise by the Republicans to reduce taxes. And we immediately, guess what goes up? The national debt goes up, right? Okay. Okay. We also start to lose investment. So they have to renew the taxes, but they move them away from corporations and towards the middle class, right? And upper middle class. That's one respect. And then guess who recovers the economy? It's the Democrats. Under Democratic presidential periods, the economy recovers. Guess who takes credit for it? The Republicans do. So a lot of this stuff is media hype and inaccurate discussion. Remember the kind of arguments that you were just a little kid, but there were arguments every Sunday. And
Well, there's still arguments every
Buckley.
Sunday.
Well, Buckley,
Buckley.
but not like
Firing line.
Yes,
Yeah.
but Buckley would have the greatest liberals, and including James Baldwin.
Right.
Right.
Oh yeah,
and they would have famous arguments, very civil and very intelligent.
Look, but I like Buckley because he was an honest conservative.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
look, Filipinos are basically conservative people. And here's one thing. I think Donald Trump was way liberal on coronavirus, to think that he could not wear a mask and not infect people, that he could do anything he pleased. That's a very liberal kind of thing. I'm very conservative. I stay home.
Safety. Well, see, you're okay. This should not be either a liberal or conservative thing. When he decided that he could get away without being a mask, that's a Trump thing. That has nothing to do with liberals. That, to put that in the category with liberalism or constitutional philosophy, that's crazy. What it is individualism.
Individual.
Right?
Well, look, I was in part making a small joke there to try to bring out the fact that his actions were contrary.
They were loose.
Yeah, a little
freedom,
loose.
freedom,
A little
freedom. I want freedom.
And I think that's one of the things. I mean, I bring this up because we're not taking any sides here, but what we are doing is we're just pointing out some of the things that are existent in the community now. AAPI data is out there. We can talk about where Filipinos are historically, because this will be part of the data picture. We got
a lot of Filipinos who are ex-military, and they were strongly in favor of Trump when he first ran and when he initially took office. But they started having problems with him in about the second year.
Yeah,
the end of the second year, when he was doing the Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq three-step. I call it the three-step, right? And I would argue with these guys, and I say, hey, who do you think is being favored by Trump policy right now in the Middle East? And they wouldn't talk because they knew it was Russia. Russia's getting the goodies, right? The UAE and Saudis were getting the goodies, and that's the way it was. And I, look at this. Why did you guys go into Iraq? And then he talks about we kept the oil in Syria from Syria and Iraq, and I say, look, it's coming out right out of his face, man. It's coming right out of his face. So come on, what do you think? So a lot of them have gone independent. They left the Republican Party and they've gone independent.
I think you're right. I mean, it's funny that the debate happened in where the Cleveland Clinic is at Case Western Reserve, and there's a lot of Santo Tomas doctors, now working in America, who work at the Cleveland Clinic. Very, very pro-business, pro-Trump, and yet I wonder how they feel about, like we were saying earlier, about how Trump was just very, if he found out that he got the virus on Wednesday, I mean, it really shows a kind of negligence in how he carried himself and how he exposed others, and a kind of a disregard for other people's health. And
negligence is a stronger term than even the general media is using at this point. They don't say negligence. Negligence at least means that it gives you the opportunity to the out by saying, it was erroneous, right? I'm further than that. I'm way out beyond that, and it's malevolence. It is intentional, egoistic malevolence. He's crapid. He actually believes his own imagery. He puts out these images of himself, and he actually was able to get away with it for months. Well, we're 8 months into this thing, and he didn't get sick until now. However, by cranking up his campaign and having the big rallies, he was rolling the dice, and they were getting loaded against him. The odds were increasingly in favor of him and people in his immediate circle contracting the virus and being spreaders. That's not negligence. Right. That's not negligence. That's malevolent intent.
I happen to think that, well, I'm like a lot of people out there, thoughts and prayers, yes, but I'm just wondering about all his past actions, and I'm just we were talking about, we sort of established with the
think if he gets really sick and they have to move Pence in, I think boy, is it going to be crazy. This is already bad enough. So I'm wishing him well for the reason that I want to see him being capable enough at least to finish out the campaign in however way he finishes it out, because I do not want us to go into the level of chaos that's going to occur if he gets sicker and he has to put everything over to Pence. Did you see the way Pence looked when he was asked directly, what kind of preparations are being done?
I don't know if I saw that exact question.
To protect the succession, right? To protect the succession.
Yeah, I've seen him in some press conferences, but he does not look prepared.
No, he actually looked fearful.
Yeah.
He looked fearful of one, where that question, if he answered, how to answer it. How do I answer that? Right.
Well,
And so he wasn't even just fearing the possibility that he might be the guy in charge. He was fearing the reaction to the question, his reaction to the question.
yeah. Well, here's the problem with the Trump management style. And then it's really like
Well, let's give him a lot of credit.
well, I'm just saying
Style.
that like with the press conference today with the doctors at Walter Reed, it's almost like you play to an audience of one. We're not playing to an audience of one. I
Yeah.
think we're trying to be even handed, but I think it's fair to just look at it, observe it. And we have a lot of Filipino Americans, as I pointed out through the AAPI data, who are Trump supporters.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just wanted, it will be an historical thing to look back and say, look at this, the Asian Americans, Vietnamese were first, then Filipino Trump supporters. How did they react to this situation? How did they respond in this crisis?
I'm looking for it right now. There was one area that I wanted to, yeah, and you're absolutely right. And I think it's not going to change a lot of minds of people who are invested in Trump. I think they're going to stay there anyway, because of they use the economy as a rationale.
But
Underlying that rationale, I think, is abortion.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean,
so
Filipinos are largely Catholic,
yeah.
and actually that whole Amy Coney Barrett Supreme Court nomination is in danger because we got two senators who are sick with COVID and may not be able to make a quorum to push this thing through. So you have a lot of things happening.
Yeah, but what if McConnell forces them? And what if they go ahead and set up some kind of Zoom vote? They've been against that the whole time, right? But now, because they want to put this person on the bench, right? They're gonna do whatever they can. Okay. Now here, before we go further, all right, on the abortion issue and on the favoritism towards Barrett, all right, this confirmation. Okay, I said in my Twitter, on my Twitter pages, I tweeted months ago that, okay, they put all these Federalist list judges throughout the district and appellate courts, right? And they're trying to get the Supreme Court as well. They got a majority already, okay? And I said, here's the problem. Even Federalist listed judges have a point where they cannot contradict the strength of the facts and the law. And you've already seen, for example, Kavanaugh siding with the so-called liberal contingent on at least two decisions, okay? You've seen Roberts, okay, be the swing vote, before RGB passed,
right?
RBG passed, and so you got to understand, judges, even though I was not real happy with Kavanaugh, making it through, if he's got any salt at all, he's gonna follow the law, and so all these things that the Republicans have been using, all these devices to suppress votes and all that stuff, I mean, we used to think that the gerrymandering was bad, right? But the stuff they're doing now and in 2016 is just, and 2018, totally ridiculous, right? I mean, closing down voting polls.
Yeah.
Right? Abbott in Texas, right? What did he do? Only one ballot drop box per county. County, right?
You got to make a day out of voting if you want to make sure that your ballot gets there. I mean, forget about what happened to the mail, but this is also another question, because a lot of Asian Americans, Filipino in particular, have said, I mean, more than 30-40% say they vote by mail. This is
right.
I'm a permanent mail voter.
Yeah, me too. I just started doing that.
And if you vote by mail, given the rumblings about voter suppression, I mean, a lot of people don't vote by mail because they like the assistance, but now we don't know, will they be intimidated to ask for assistance if there are poll watchers from other
Right.
sides to try to intimidate.
Right.
This is not a good look for democracy.
It's not just not a good look. I mean, it's an erosion. It's a further erosion of people's confidence in the system. And when you start feeling that their safety is at risk beyond COVID-19, when they start, if they start hearing stories about what kind of processes of intimidation were used after the passage of the 15th Amendment, right? And all the way up into the poll tax era, right, of the 60s. If they hear any of those stories, I wouldn't blame people for being scared to show up at the polls.
Yeah.
But they should turn to the mail-in ballot or the ballot drop situation. That's much better. But then we got to worry about who's grabbing the ballots, right?
Well, but would you say that it would be better for Filipino Americans if they're voting? And let's hope they all vote. We don't care who you vote for, as long as you vote. But would you say that Filipino Americans should vote in person? Is that important this year?
I think if they are in a situation where it's not going to be really crowded, they're not going to have to stand in line for a long time, I would do that. I would vote in person. I had mail-in ballot for 2018, but I filled it out and I brought it in to my usual voting station and I dropped it off.
I do the same thing. I vote by mail. I drop it off just as an added assurance. And this isn't a crazy thing that's happening now, because I have always thought, boy, our voting system, it just seems that you get the card, they give you a little black pen, you mark it up, you hand it out, and it's just amazing that it has lasted so long without being, I mean, really the amount of voter fraud has really been negligible.
Minuscule.
Yeah, minuscule. I mean, it just hasn't been a great thing. But the fear of it now is up because people talk about it like it's real. I mean,
yeah.
And in the echo chamber of the way news and information is disseminated now, if you believe it's true,
even though Kosach's fake ass commission, remember that? Failed miserably.
Yeah.
I mean,
right. Yeah. But Kovac, I mean, the thing is, there is no Republicans who investigate this stuff. That guy Ginsburg, who goes up on all the news shows, these are Republican attorneys, says, hey, there's no mail fraud, voter fraud. It just doesn't exist. And yet, if people keep hearing about it, it does have that effect of saying, oh, it
erodes confidence. And it erodes confidence, it raises questions, raises doubt. That's exactly what they intend to do. Then on the other hand, you have misinformation that's coming in deluge. I mean, this situation that the president and his inner circle are in right now with being infected, boy, this is just such an ideal situation for the Russians to jump on.
Yeah.
And that inner circle is still saying China, China, China. And China's going to play too, but they're not playing like the Russians. They got a different agenda,
And they have different technology. They're just as adept in technology, but they're on the TikTok game, right?
Hey.
they're not trying to come at it from we're gonna infect your algorithms and infect your Facebook, but it is a nasty world out there, and it's you have to figure that both countries, Russia and China, have missiles pointing directly at us.
Yep.
So
they got long distance ICBM ability. Not only that, Russia's got all them subs, man. They got submarines.
But it's just it's a crazy world. And when you have someone who is showing some kind of instability, who is your leader, I mean, here's the bigger question for people who are Trump supporters. We said earlier that all the stuff that's happening now isn't going to have an impact, but it does seem that if you're a reasonable person and not a Trump supporter, it would be kind of alarming if you wanted to vote for someone who showed some medical issues right now. I mean, could you in good conscience vote for someone who is, I mean, they say he could recover without any long-term effect, but we know that people, especially from a at-risk group, could be impacted
Right.
by, long term.
We don't take extreme measures, but we do take strong measures to be safe because both Linda and I are in that quote high risk group. I mean,
Yeah.
we're officially over 70 seniors. So yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I'm not quite there, but I'm taking more severe measures, and I freak out when I got a little tickle in my throat or something.
Right.
I I'm not paranoid, but
Yeah.
it is something. All right, so Dan,
You got to get off the smoking the marijuana. That's all.
oh,
I
there's
mean,
none of
just
that.
switch over to like
I
you can
I
get an oil. You can get an oil for that.
I only mow my grass. I don't do any of that. None of that legal stuff either. I'm as straight arrow as it comes.
Yeah, the only kind of grass you take is like asparagus, right? Yeah, that's
No,
not
not
even.
even that. Not even
What?
that. No, no,
What?
no. No, I'm a kale
What do
guy.
you got
I'm
against
kale.
asparagus,
I'm kale
brother?
all the way.
That asparagus built Stockton, dude.
I'm a kale guy all the way. All right.
Oh my God!
So,
How do you
so
make it taste good?
Dan, look, I
Go
said,
heavy with the bagong. Go heavy with bagong on that kale.
Dan, I'm gonna have you back later in the month. We'll talk more about this and people who have caught up to us here. Actually, I'm gonna say this because we do have a chat box. If you want to ask Dan a question, I mean,
Uh-oh.
there's some people on there. I mean, they could put a comment in the chat box. Say, Dan, tell me about why you believe what you believe, or some people say, "Hi, Dan." I mean,
Because I gave up on Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny when I was 9.
no, 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 no. If they have a question, I will stay on for a few more for minutes while a question or two comes on.
Okay,
We've
yeah,
had a we've had a
I got my chat vision open.
we've had
Okay,
we've had a wide ranging discussion, but basically about Filipino history to try to understand where we are now
right,
and try to understand where we might be going. We talked about the Filipino frontliners. We
right,
talked about the nurses. We
right.
talked about the current situation. We talked about the vote, whether or not people should vote in person. Um, I think the big story though remains the president's health, and
Yeah,
I didn't I
it
didn't
is a big issue
I
for a
don't
wide variety of reasons.
I don't yeah.
But because it's so important on such a wide range of issues, it becomes overwhelming. You know what I mean? If people were to develop a checklist and see all of the kind of things that we have to deal with in real terms, uh, and this is without looking at what Mr. Trump's record is on those issues, right? Just to understand that those are live issues, right?
Yeah.
That are of great consequence, okay? Not just the economy overall, but our trade relationship with China, our trade relationship with South Korea, okay? Our trade relationship with the EU, right? And with Mexico,
Right.
okay? People don't realize how important that relationship is and how much U.S. policy has adversely affected that relationship. And that's just on the trade issue. Then we look at the domestic front and we look at social justice, we look at police aggression, right? I use that term, police aggression. And I get reaction in my classes. The students go, "What are you talking about, police aggression?" And I describe instances, and the conservative folks will say, "Well, those are anecdotal." Okay. And okay. And then I'll show judicial actions, like trying people 6, 7, and 8 at a time in front of the same judge and same jury, okay, with shared attorney representation. And they're in disbelief. And you know what I prove? I prove it by looking at the court records of how San Francisco strike students were treated in the San Francisco courts. That's what stuns them, because it brings it right home to SF State, and it gives them a different perspective on what the strike was all about. Everybody always looks at the confrontational tactics and
Right.
all of the brave rhetoric and all the rest of that stuff. They don't look at the institutional responses to that. That's
Well,
what
it's
we're
true.
missing. That's what we're missing. And that's why Filipino Americans have to learn who to look to within their own communities for an accurate perspective. And in Stockton, you got to look to the teachers.
Right.
You got to look at who's in the classroom with your kids, if you have kids or grandchildren or relatives or whatever. You know, how's Tubbs doing, by the way?
Tubbs, I think Tubbs is doing well. I think that he's, he's trying this progressive movement, of the $1,000 and
Yeah, sure.
and that's, I think has some popularity. I think, look, the museum's in Stockton. I don't live in Stockton, so I'm not as close to the the inner workings of the city. I think the city has a lot of problems because people think it's abandoned. People think it's, but there are people there. And when I worked in the newspaper business there, when I was a columnist there, I thought, these people they have a right to, to a free press. They have a right to information. They have a right to good government. And I think a lot of times people just feel neglected there. And
Well, they are neglected. Yeah.
they are. Yeah. And I think that the Filipino American community is a big part of Stockton. I think sometimes they are neglected. And I think I'm just happy that the museum is there for them as well as for the entire community to let them know about, what's happening with Filipino Americans today and how to put it in an historical context. So I think Tubbs is doing generally well. I know there's a lot of Filipino American teachers here who
Yeah.
are doing all they can to make sure that that all kids are getting the best education
Yeah.
can. But now under COVID, boy,
It's really rough.
it's
It's
very
really,
difficult
really rough.
between Zoom lessons, non-Zoom lessons. I know I'm just glad I don't have kids right now, and who are grade
Of
grade
that age group.
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's really it's tough. So I know that Filipino American History Month. We originally that's what we were talking about. This is where would we say we are as Filipino Americans in
In terms
2020?
of knowledge of history or what?
Well, in terms of how about in terms of where we are in general as a Filipino community, and in terms of our knowledge, in terms of what we know about our history.
Well, we are still over 60% first generation. In other words, more than 60% of our population overall in the country are first generation arrivals. Okay. And so that generation, as you described earlier, and now when we're talking about first generation arrivals, don't get confused, right? We're talking about multi-generational from the 20-year perspective, right? We're talking about four up to four generations, because there's people in their 80s and 90s, right? And some of them are voting by mail. So we got some of them are making it to the voting polls because they live nearby, right? Yeah. But so it's an active community in that sense. But they are all you got to do is look at the newspapers, right? Yeah. What's the content of the newspapers? And today, I think it's closer to 50-50 than it ever was in the past. In the past, man, I would see longer articles about everybody's favorite singer or actor singer, or actress singer and politician than you would about what was going on here. Yeah. In the United States. And now it's a little more 50-50. And I think a lot of that is because there are more Filipinos, including first generation Filipinos, who are active politically and who actually have run for office, some having succeeded in holding office as immigrants. And so when people start to see that, they can identify, right, with people who actually successfully not only participate in the political process, but they participate to the level of gaining elected office. So that has increased for us. And we've got more people right now that are on ballots all over the place in the United States than we've ever had before.
Yeah, and I'm actually surprised by that because it took a long time to get to that point.
Hmm.
And even when you talk about Rob Bonta, first assemblyman, Filipino descent here in California, look how long that took, you know, and uh, we just didn't have any. And then here's Bonta, great, and now um, Congress for the longest time, Bobby Scott, who's part black, the
Right.
only the only the only part Filipino legislator, and he's proud of his Filipino heritage. But
Mm.
now we have another
He
part.
identifies. Yeah, that's important. It's important that the Filipino community recognize these folks as people who identify with being
Yeah, yeah.
Filipino.
He
Because a lot
identified.
of times we claim folks, but they don't claim back. You know what I
Yeah. Oh,
mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess was Prince one of them. Prince.
God, that
Oh, yeah.
again? Oh no, more
He was
mythology.
he was multi, but no,
More mythology.
no. But the thing is, Bobby Scott out of Virginia. He is the Filipino American in Congress. Actually, but he was joined by T.J. Cox,
Yeah,
who
right.
was
That's
voted
right.
in from the Central Valley. So that's two. There might be another one. There's a woman out of Texas who's running, has a good chance. And then, but I think really where Filipinos shine, and you mentioned him, the number of Filipinos running for local positions, mayors, city councils. Uh, well, Dave Gingona is running, or not Dave, his brother.
Mike.
Mike Gingona is running for supervisor in San Mateo County.
Yeah, this is at least his second time to try.
Well, I mean, and he's
The
got
first time he went against a Nevin. And going against a Nevin in San Mateo County is crazy. I went to school with some of those guys.
yeah.
They're
Well,
Jesuit educated. They're very well connected, and but now it's a lot better. It's a little more in his favor now.
I wish Mike well. But you see a lot of these Filipinos who are making headway into politics. Here's my question to you: while it's good to be represented, when you see how politics is run overall, there's something kind of not inspiring, or there's nothing really attractive about the way politics is run these days. I
Yes,
mean,
that's
even
true.
even before the COVID thing with Trump, if you just saw the debate last Tuesday, it was what 73 million people watched it, and almost, it was pretty uniform, the response that, oh my God, what what kind of debate was that? Worst debate in presidential debate history, some people called it. Did you
Well, it
think
only
the
started
debate was?
getting televised. What was it? Kennedy Nixon, right?
Oh yeah, okay. Let's keep in mind that there probably were far worse debates before television
That's right.
and during Lincoln Douglas debates and all that.
Right, right,
But but all right, so we can't say historically it was the worst ever.
right.
But to get back to the initial, sense of the question, if a Filipino American were watching that, should they be inspired to lead? Should they be inspired to enter politics? Should they be inspired to be a part of their city council?
The reaction around my immediate family was the first reaction, regardless of their party affiliation or inclination, was embarrassment. It was embarrassment. So, so there's some common ground
Mhm.
among all of us as to the level of civility that we would expect, from
Right.
a situation like that, particularly a political debate that could result in the election of the leader of the so-called leader of the free world, right, and the most
Right.
powerful nation in the world. And I think people were very embarrassed, and people on the left and center left were grossly disgusted. And then people on the right were stuck with having to try to rationalize that situation, although some were duly critical. Okay, you're talking about inspiration.
Yeah.
Here, this is really, I, at the risk of sounding reductionistic and oversimplifying,
Fine. Go ahead.
all politics is local.
Sure.
Okay, so however disgusted or embarrassed you were, and however uncomfortable you were in trying to rationalize what happened, it has little to do with your immediate quality of life. What's on the state and local ballot and the kind of people that are running for office where you live is what's going to have the most immediate impact on your quality of life. And so you should be inspired if you see the opportunity to make change, however small you might think the change is. If it's something that enhances quality of life for more people and encourages people to look at things in terms of common interest, right? What's good for the whole, okay? Then you should engage in politics at whatever level necessary. Now, here's the happy thing. Ever since the mass shooting in Florida of the high school, right? You have seen that adolescent group of potential voters, while they were still in high school, be very effective advocates.
Right.
And the scope of their advocacy has gone beyond gun control. The scope of their advocacy has gone to fair and equal treatment. And their criticism now is in line with BLM, with Black Lives Matter.
Right.
So there is a younger generation that were even more motivated, right, by their own personal experience with the politics of America than even we were in the 60s and 70s. You know, we're motivated by the draft, we're motivated by the war, we're motivated by the inequity, racial inequity, class inequity in American society, but not to the profound extent that a lot of these younger kids are. And there's my hope. And so I'm putting a lot of support towards organizations that usually staffed by volunteer work by teachers, social workers, right, and community service renderers,
right,
who are paying attention to the needs of youth. That's where I'm putting a lot of my emphasis, because I see great potential in the group that's just now coming into college, the group that has just graduated from college, and then the high schoolers and even middle schoolers that are coming up. This situation has provoked a level of discussion and social interaction that we haven't seen since the 50s and 60s.
Right.
You know, I remember when the Kingston Trio came out with Tom Dooley. I don't even know if you were born yet.
Oh, come on, Tom Dooley, yes.
Yeah, hang down your head, Tom Dooley.
Hang down your head.
Well, you look so much younger than me. I mean, look at your hair. I mean, geez.
Hey, look, I'm a man of pigment. Come on. Come on.
Yeah.
I got a joke for that. You're going to have to come to my show.
But, okay. Monday night. I know it's not Zoomed, huh?
It is Zoomed. Yeah. It'll
be.
Okay,
Cool. Yeah. I will come to your show. To your show because Linda,
yeah,
she won't let me go to the march. There's no way.
No, but I know.
She knows immediately that I would head for the nearest mezcal bar.
No, the Marsh. Look, the Marsh. I'm doing a one-man show at the Marsh on Monday, the 5th at 7:30. So there's other people on the bill, but I talk about why I'm in my closet, my COVID closet. But Dan, you're saying you have such an admiration for the youth, and I agree with
expectation.
You. Yeah, expectation.
Potential.
Oh yeah, expectation is different from admiration.
I admire them too, but
But expectation, they have potential, they have upside.
Yeah.
All right, now
very
look,
strong.
We've gone on a while, and if people are just joining us, we're doing this wide-ranging conversation because we can. Here we're talking about, this is our virtual Filipino American National History Society Museum pop-up, and talking about history. Go back in the recording. We did talk about some history. We talked about things now, and we talked about this historical glimpse that the AAPI data in the National Asian American Voter Survey has given us. I want to just bring up just a couple of questions. Looking at the Filipino thing, here's a question. Generally speaking, do you think of yourself as a Democrat, Republican, Independent, other party? Do not think in terms of political parties? Don't know. Where do you think Filipinos were?
Oh, I think they do think in terms of political parties. I just don't know how
Well, what percentage do you think were Democrat?
of Filipinos.
Yeah.
Oh man, probably 60%, something like that.
46%
Oh
Democrat.
wow, that's low.
Yeah. And 46, it was the highest were Asian Indian 54, and then Japanese and Korean at 51, Vietnamese at 27, Chinese 38.
Oh, I see it now. Yeah, yeah.
And and Filipinos were 46, but Asian Americans in general were 44. So we were sort of above the Asian American line, but still lower than a lot of key groups, higher than Chinese. So the two largest groups, Chinese and Filipino, were just south of 50% on the Democratic side. Now, where do you think we were in terms of Republican? What percent?
Well, obviously, if we're close to 50%, then somewhere around 40%.
28% say.
Ooh, that's a good sign. I like that.
Well,
I didn't look that far. I didn't look that far. What number is that?
I'm not telling you because I want to quiz you some more.
Oh, okay.
28% said they were Republican.
Wow, that's good.
How many percent said independent?
Oh, probably really low. Probably 12%.
16%. I mentioned that because you said a lot of Filipinos are moving toward independence. Now tell me, given
mostly Republicans, mostly former Republicans, but some Democrats have also migrated over to independence.
And that would make sense because then that would show maybe over 50% Republican.
16% is healthy. I think that's healthy.
Yeah. So when given that split, 46% Democrat, 28% Republican, 16% independent, how does that compare with how the Filipino American community has been throughout your experience politically? What would you say? Is that a?
I think it was a little higher.
A little higher
locally in the Bay Area. I think it was a little higher for Democrats. A little higher for Democrats during the 80s, and then a lot of people. The Republican thing in the San Francisco Bay Area really suffered. You know, a lot of people did not want to sign up as Republicans locally. And it was pretty obvious that a lot of Republicans didn't want to sign up as Republicans. They were going independent. So I don't think Filipinos went independent, but I think they stayed Republican, at least in name, their affiliation.
Right.
Some moved towards independent, and a few Democrats moved towards independent as well. So I think nationally, man, it's a heads up because we got people, Filipinos for Trump in Ohio.
Yeah,
in large numbers.
Yeah, the Filipinos for Trump in Ohio are a large group, and I talked to a couple of them, and this would seem the numbers that I just showed. I mean, one would think that there would be more Democrats in that Filipino column. It's less than 50%. And it just shows maybe a moderation of the Filipino community, I think, right?
I think so. I think abortion and Catholicism has a lot to do with their positions. I mean, it would be really interesting to see someone have the audacity to run a survey that would ask that question.
Well, they asked the question here about some other issues. Let's see if I have. Oh, I didn't print out the issue one. But you know what we'll do is here is, they did ask here. Let me see here. They did ask about how people felt for each of the following issues. Please indicate whether you think. Okay, now I don't want to do that. Oh, here. local government. Let's see, where's a good question here? Well, we'll have to go over this to see where the Filipino American community is, because it is kind of like Filipino Americans, for example, are very strong on anti-guns,
Good.
according to this national poll.
Well, at the same time, though, I know a lot of Filipinos who are very gun heavy.
Right, very pro-gun, very pro.
Yeah, yeah.
Look, we have
they're members. I know a few that are members of the Oath, the Oath Keepers.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, look, when we have you back, we'll talk about some of the national Asian American voter survey, because it's interesting to compare where where Filipino Americans are now politically with where they were, or our sense of where they were and where they are now, and to see why that's so. Let me ask a question from the chat box. Karina, who says, "Hi, Dan." She says, "Who do you want to see moderate future debates? And should we even have future debates?" I guess is one question. I guess they're going to have the vice presidential debate.
Yeah, I'm trying to see why my chat box, it's open, but I'm not seeing anybody. So, okay. Hi, Karina. Thank you very much for your question. I'm going to take the second part of your question first. No, I think after Mr. Trump's behavior and after the reactions by Mr. Biden, I think we probably shouldn't go on for the debates. I would like to see the vice presidential debate. I think it's ridiculous that they make people jump on a plane and go somewhere else in the country when both Pence is second in line, right? He should stay in DC, and they should, if they're going to have the vice presidential debate, they should have it in DC so that he's close by. Okay.
Well, I think they should Zoom it. I think you should just forget about any kind of sense of a non-socially distanced debate. You should forget about any kind of campaign kind of, a bounce or push, some kind of push from it, because, you're in an area and you can do some events. You should just do it. We should just be safe.
Sure. Okay, that's fine. But I'm saying we shouldn't have any more presidential debates. You can do the vice presidential, but not the presidential.
I think, look, I have moderated some debates. I've moderated a gubernatorial debate amongst
I remember that.
Yeah, I mean, it was the ethnic media, and only, we didn't have Arnold Schwarzenegger did not show up. We had Bustamante, he was running at the time,
right.
And we had the Green Party candidate and some other lesser candidates. But the whole thing about debate is it's all timekeeping and moderation.
Yeah.
And a moderator can't be afraid to jump in there and say, hey,
Stop.
And Chris Wallace.
Stop talking now.
Well, Chris Wallace, I think he wasn't timid, but he wanted to be invisible. He wanted to let them talk. And unfortunately, I think a couple of times he did cut in, and but it was still like maybe we were an hour into the debate, or at least 5 minutes in.
Right.
So anyway. Well, that was a question from Karina. Her question.
But her first part of her question was who should moderate it?
Right. Who should moderate?
I think instead of getting a news personality or somebody like that, I would get a judge. I would get a judge. I would get a retired, nonpartisan judge, and have them moderate it. They know how to do that. I mean, judges do arbitration on a regular basis. They also carry with them a level of authority, okay, that a news person or journalist does not have.
Hey.
I'm talking about authority here. I'm talking about legal authority. I'm talking about being a member of the freaking bench, man. Journalists don't have that.
We don't have a bench. A bench. We're standing up all the time. No, I agree with you. I think journalists when journalists become forceful, people start hating journalists.
Yeah, they already do.
Yeah, and they do. All right, like
Even if they don't hate them, they distrust them. And
right,
so there's always an angle, right? There's always an angle.
here's my idea for the debate.
Okay.
The next debate should be in dueling twin dunking tubs. And you have Biden in one, you have Trump in the other. And if they talk too long, you dunk them.
Yeah, yeah.
If they say something to, hey, look, I'm going to warn you, I'm going to dunk you.
Yeah. Can there be like partial dunk? You know,
Or you're
we'll
just
only dunk them up to here. You know, you don't want to jeopardize their health, right? You know, you just,
we'll have it a heated dunking pool, and they can dangle their feet in to get used to the water. But if they mess up, we're pushing the button.
They're going in.
We jump down, pop up, and then
Yeah, and I'm assuming that's water, right? They would be. Yeah, it's not. There's some other organic material.
It would be water, but that's my idea. That's why, and then they'll say, "Oh no, let's take this seriously, Emil. Clearly, you're not serious.
Yeah,
clearly, you're not serious." But
I think he's serious, folks.
I think it would be kind of interesting to see a dunking contest. Okay, that's all right. So Dan, I promise I wouldn't keep you too long.
Judge, man, get a judge, get a person who arbitrates, get a person who thinks both sides.
How about a booty judge? Get a booty judge, because he needs some work. Booty judge. In fact, I think he wanted to be a judge at the Binibining Pilipinas, and then he'd be a booty judge.
He's just what you have now done to FANHS, man, on air and live.
This is the fun part of our program, friends. Look, the whole thing about these Facebook Live things is that we just try to make them fun, informative, and we try to make them an example of, look, Dan Gonzales has been in the community a long time. He is a font of information. We welcome him to come on our program to just talk about these issues. And he's mentioned that he's too modest to say that there are so many more people who know more than him, but he is one of the few who are willing to come out and say some things that you wouldn't hear anywhere else.
Well, one of the problems that we have is that what we see as history, comes out of, most of it comes out of journalism. Journalism is the first draft, right? Yeah. And it's true. So the problem then is what passes for journalism? How are people informed? And people get to choose how they want to be informed based on what they already believe. So rather than being exposed to relatively unbiased, middle of the road journalism, back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, or 80s even, there were the antenna stations, right, were the ones that people watched for their journalism. And during critical periods like Vietnam War and Watergate particularly, they were getting basically the same facts.
Yeah.
Right? And now, God, you can get things that are so afactual that they're more than disinformation. I mean, it's malinformation. I mean, if we could make that distinction.
Well, it's and this is why Facebook has become the bane of democracy, because of the algorithm. And if they're only funneling in, if you've got a varied and diverse number of friends, and you only get the input or the opinions from the people who are like you're not getting the real benefit of, or any of the journalistic benefit.
That's right. Real journalism. Yeah.
Of getting both sides, or getting at least, a balanced picture of, now it's hard to mention a balanced picture when, we're talking about, I mean, it won't appear to be a balanced picture if we're talking about Trump's health and we talk about Trump 80% of the time. Thank goodness Joe Biden wasn't negative, or wasn't positive rather, but who knows?
Yet.
I mean, it could take a while. If he's tested every day, we might see something. I mean, we talked about the debate, and the vice presidential debate is going to go on, and they're going to move it back 12 feet, which to me doesn't sound quite far enough. I mean, when you look at Biden and Trump, and they were yelling
Well,
and
the
expect
louder of the two, and the person who's most accustomed to projecting
right.
is actually our fair senator.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and
yeah,
Pence is much more quiet,
yeah.
but
He's used to work in the microphone
yeah,
as opposed to
yeah,
projecting.
yeah.
Um,
And
so
so it's going to be an interesting situation. I would, Pence is going to act like a much more reasonable participant in that process, and that's the reason that I would like to see it.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
I'd like
I do not think that Mr. Trump would be any more rational or reasonable than he was the first time around, and so I'm not for any further presidential debates. I
yeah.
don't think it helps either side. I actually think that it hurt him more than anything. So
Well, I don't know how it helped, except that it gave him. I mean, if you were for him, see, here's the thing: if you were for him, you liked what he did. But there's a lot of people who are for him who did not like what he did, and that's what kind of moderates that opinion that, oh boy, he did hurt himself.
yeah,
So that's why I like to see Pence, because
yeah,
we're
me
still
too.
not out of the weekend,
Yeah.
and who knows what will happen. Um,
Well, see, today, I guess yesterday technically was the first day, and they're saying 5 days for Mr. Trump at the
in the
hospital.
and
So
the
what will be interesting is if on the fourth or fifth day they extend his stay, then clearly the issue of succession becomes even more immediate.
yeah,
And yesterday people were already saying, why isn't the government taking a bipartisan position on protecting the top five who are
right.
in line for succession? Two of whom are in their 80s,
Right.
right?
Pelosi's 80.
Yep.
No, this is the political talk is an important thing to talk about at a Filipino American National Historical Society museum program, because these are historical times.
This is a historical moment, and it's going to have major effect on Filipino community in general. I think the possibilities for the younger generation um, do not lie with the current Republican Party. Um, I need to say this before we close out. You've mentioned a couple of times that the Republican Party of today was not like the Republican Party of yore, even during the Nixon period and the Reagan period, and you're right. But I need to get again a personal anecdote. The person who encouraged me to go to law school was a Republican, and he was one of the clerks for the California State Supreme Court, Mr. Richard C. Morris. And he was actually asked by the Reagan administration, because Reagan was a California governor previously, and he knew the court system and all the rest of that stuff, familiar with people. And he asked Mr. Morris to go back and work in the DOJ in DC, and also to be involved in the RNC, the Republican National Committee.
Right.
Within my recollection is within less than a year, but it might have been as much of a year and a half, he was back, and he took advantage of the fact that they give you a 2-year leave when you're a member of a state department governmental office, and he came back, and I was surprised. So I went to visit him, and I said, what happened? And because he knew I graduated from law school a half a block away, right, Hastings.
Right.
And and they all said, you got to come here and work for us. And I said, no, I didn't want to do that. But I went to visit him, and I asked him simply, what happened? Why'd you come back? And he said, they don't call it a swamp for nothing. And that was about as much detail as he gave me. So we have what, in my opinion, was a classic Republican of the William F. Buckley type.
Yeah.
People ask me, how come you got all this Stanford stuff? Because when my kids were going to school, they needed a folder for something, and I let them use one of my Stanford folders. they said, why you got the Stanford stuff? I said, it was given to me by guys that graduated from Stanford, you know, that worked at the California State Supreme Court. And of course, my kids couldn't understand how I could have a relationship with members of that court and their clerks. And I said, your grandpa was a custodian at the California State Supreme Court for 16 years. And he was one of the most popular guys on their staff. You know, they were giving him cigars. He got a gold watch that I buried him with that has the signature of the justices on it. Supreme Court. So, you know, that's the relationship. So here I had all this stuff. He got a gold watch that were given to me. I'm getting reverb.
Yeah, I'm getting reverb too.
You know.
So hold on a second, Dan. That was my fault, and I've got to fix it.
I think you did that intentionally, man. Given to me, and I was trying to.
Yeah, I'm getting.
Oh, you got it.
I did not do it. Hold on a second. I did not do that intentionally. That was my fault. But I've got to fix it. I did it.
I think you did that intentionally, man. Given to me. Yeah, I was trying to.
Yeah, you're going in for the kill. Hold on a second.
Well, you know, intentionally. I really respect intelligent conservatives.
Yeah,
I think you did that intentionally, man.
No, hold on a second. I'm trying to figure out where you're going in for the kill. This is
it's now in triplicate. It sounds like we're doing a round. Intelligent conservatives.
Yeah,
I think you did that intentionally, man.
Boy, now we're really confusing the electorate. You're going in for the kill. This is
it's now in triplicate. It sounds like we're doing a round.
Yeah, this is like we're like folk singing. Oh my God! What am I doing? Really confusing the electorate. Wait, hold on a second. This is no, seriously.
It sounds like we're doing a round.
Yeah, this is like we're like folk singing. Oh my God!
I think we're down to one now.
Really confusing the electorate. Yeah. It sounds like we're singing. No, seriously.
Row your boat.
Well, Dan, I don't know what to do.
I think we're down to one now.
Are we down to one? Yeah, it sounds like we're singing. No, seriously.
Row your boat.
Yeah. There's only one thing we can do at a time like this.
Let's cut it off.
And that is say, Dan, thank you very much for being here.
It was fun.
And it was fun. And we'll have you back before the month is over. We can do at a time like this.
All right, yeah.
Because, and that is say, Dan, because very much. Because Dan, I really think that the point you were trying to make was important. We'll have you back before the month is over.
Yeah, because classic conservatives. My family doctor from when I was a child, and my parents' doctor.
This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to cut the. Maybe if I pause the recording.
The month is over.
Yeah.
No, that doesn't do it.
Classic conservatives. My family doctor. From when I was a child, and my parents' doctor.
This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to. That doesn't do it either. Maybe if I pause the recording. All right, Ron, Dan.
You got to go.
This is my bad.
That doesn't do it.
That's all right. We gone.
We did it. I will invite you back. Happy
October Filipino American History Month.
This is my bad.
That doesn't do it.
That's all right. We gone. It's okay. You'll figure it out.
I will invite you back. Happy.
I'm just happy it didn't happen on my
yeah, no, it's not your fault. It's totally mine. This is my bad. And so let me wait. Now, stay on the Zoom because I will eliminate our live, and
I'm just happy it didn't happen on my
yeah, no, it's not your fault. It's totally mine. Okay, here it is. This is my bad. And so let me wait. Now, stay on the Zoom because I will eliminate our live. And okay, I can't.
Happy it didn't happen on my
yeah, no, it's not your fault. It's totally mine. Okay, here it is. There. I think.
Wow.
Boy, Dan.
That was weird.
You know what I was doing? I don't know what I was. I mean, I have this computer. I was trying to switch screens, and I can't switch screens very or too often. But you know, I had all these questions here. No, I didn't. Juanita Salai Wilson said, thank you, Dan and Emil. It does say that I had 4 guests.
Yeah, see, I can't see them at all.
Yeah, I'm still on. I'm told I'm still on, so I've got to don't say anything bad here. I have to somehow go back to the main page that they changed the. Sorry, Dan.
Sorry.
But I only hear one of you, so that's good. But I'm still on.
I only hear one of you too, so.
I have to extinguish. So Dan, now since we're still on, now I can say thank you. And while I figure out how to end this, can you tell me why Filipino American National Historical Society Month is still important?
It will always be important. We need to maintain a record of our presence in the world. And we happen to be here in this country, which is, once again, one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful country in the world at a crucial moment. And not all moments for us will be crucial.
Right.
But as immigrants in a society that has demonstrated massive level of anti-immigrant attitude, in a society that still discriminates against people on the basis of not only color, but culture, we need to be aware of how we deal with those issues. And maintaining a historical record is the way we do that. And if we can do it in a moment in time when journalism tends to be biased on the extremes, and we can do that for ourselves, that gives us a level of intellectual as well as cultural independence, right? That we stand on our own. And it's on that kind of foundation that our leaders should stand. They need to be the most informed people in our communities, and maintaining our FANHS organizations nationally is the closest thing you're ever going to get to an appreciation and contribution to the maintenance of our history. Not only that, to the making of our history, because many people who make history by their actions, by their activities, right, are also directly involved in FANHS. So, there might be a problem of bias there. That's up to us. We have to be able to be self-critical inside our own organization. And that's difficult because people want heroes, and they want to look to our history for heroes.
Right.
So a lot of guys want to look up to Manny Pacquiao in spite of his political perspective on things, right?
Yeah.
And
he's kind of making a comeback.
Yeah.
A little bit, but I do know what you mean. And I think once people are exposed and hear what he's about, then they temper, they hear his homophobic remarks, they hear, on and on. They say, well, okay, you can't just side with someone because he's a Filipino. You can't just say, oh yeah, he's Filipino, he's mine.
Because he's a great boxer, yeah.
But he's a great boxer, so that in that way you can appreciate him. Well, Dan, look, I'm sorry about the little technical difficulty we had there.
No, not a problem.
You're going in for the kill in terms of this guy who gave you this guidance, and he
Mr. Richard C. Morris, attorney Richard C. Morris. He made a big deal of putting that C in there because there was another Morris that was ultra conservative and a little crazy, and then there was another Morris that was liberal. But anyway, they were all great people, and I had the honor via my dad's popularity at the courts to meet a lot of these guys. Now, the other odd thing was that we were, of course, working class, but my parents made it into the middle class. And they were obviously upper middle class and upper class. You know, a lot of the justices came from patrician backgrounds.
Right.
Okay, because they were people who had gone through their college and grad school education between the wars, you know, after the World War II and before Vietnam, and so they reflected a much more patrician background. But even the conservatives on that court had a very admirable respect for everyone, regardless of class.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was about their relationship to people as individuals. And you know, some of the best people I have ever met in my life were not only on the court and among the clerks, but they were among the custodians and janitors as well, which was, you know, much more people of color, right? A lot of Filipinos, a lot of African American, a couple of Latinos, right? But we're talking about an institution that had great integrity. That while I might disagree with some of the positions taken by individual justices or you know, the court as a whole, it was parallel. The California State Supreme Court actually led the way in terms of their decisions around individual rights, constitutional rights. They led the way. People look at the Warren Court and they say, wow, man, they were way too liberal. California led the way on a lot of those issues, okay? A lot of conservative behavior from police and from county and city government, right, went all the way through the California courts, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, you know? And I didn't get to see those cases, ironically, until I was in law school. And like I said, Hastings was a block away from the front door of 350 McAllister, which is the address of the state Supreme Court. So, you know, I had the odd situation of having a personal relationship with these folks.
Hey, look, here's the thing. Politics was so much different when people could work together and people could talk together, and when there was a kind of unity. And even then there was, you know, there was discrimination, there were instances, you know, but we were also coming into a civil rights era, right? Where we passed laws, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. And now look at what's happened in the 50 years after that. You know, greater division, everything's political, people can't talk to each other, gridlock.
Yeah.
You know, we need to almost become nostalgic for the old days when we looked at each other as human beings, as people.
There was a period of great tension, but people were still relatively civil. Nowadays, what has happened is one of the things that really upsets me is when my students take what they think is a moderate position and say things like, well, both sides do it. You know, I said, no, that really is a misplaced false equivalence. You know, it's not true. While there's corruption on both sides, the degree of corruption, you know, is something that you should compare. While there are false statements made on both sides, the degree and frequency of false statements have to be taken into consideration. When there is bad legislation or bad court decisions, the reason, the rationale for those laws, the rationale for those court decisions have to be taken into consideration. And so what has happened is one side has been much more provocative in terms of restricting who gets to play at every level, okay? And the other side has become almost totally reactionary, right? And defensive. That's a terrible place for us to be. And that is the reason for the polarization. The side that's being defensive has to get way out in front of where the provocateurs have been going. They have to get way out in front of that. and they have to educate the public, by making critical statements that are right to the point, rather than being reactionary to the moment. They got to look at things structurally and explain that stuff. Now, there's one, the two stations that are criticized all the time by Mr. Trump, the two cable, satellite stations.
MSNBC and CNN.
And CNN, right? Okay, they have the most academics and professionals in the fields that are up close and personal with whatever the issues might happen to be. And that's one of the reasons that they suffer such great criticism from the right.
Right.
And the other thing is, if you take a look at, especially MSNBC and PBS, when you take a look at who they're asking to come on as experts, when they have medical experts on, damn, like 4 out of 5 of them are some kind of Asian, right? With a heavy emphasis on South Asian, right? A lot of people with South Asian background.
Yeah, Chinese.
Yeah, and some Chinese, and occasionally you see a Filipino, right? But
not many.
Not many, because people are used to seeing South Asians by now, right? I mean,
by now, yeah.
Gupta,
Well, Sanjay
Gupta,
Gupta, he's sort of become the. It seems like they clone him. I mean, because he's on over the last couple of days to talk about, the president's health and stories about COVID. I mean, they always bring him on. But
yeah, well, there's another Gupta, younger, and he's on MSNBC, and he's working out of UW, out of University of Washington. And so people get confused, right? They think it's all the same Gupta.
I'm a one Gupta guy. I don't. Hey, look, Dan. Look, we have continued to talk, and I fixed a technical glitch.
We're done.
We have a lot to talk about when you get back, because I'd like to talk more about the Filipino American community and that voter survey and where we are, because I think there's going to be more news before we get to November 3rd.
Oh, absolutely.
I think every bit of the health of the president is going to be a news thing. We're not even done with it for the weekend. But I always appreciate your insight. I always appreciate you coming on. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Gonzales, College of
I got to check what's happening with my chat thing, because I can't see who's coming on, but I'm glad that you're able to see it. So I hope we responded okay to Karina.
Oh, yeah. I think we did. And now I know. I was looking for this the reason why I had the technical glitch is I was looking to see how we ended our conversation, but I know how to do it now. Thank you again. Thank you. If you're at home watching or on your phone, these are our virtual pop-ups. The museum is closed again this week, but by virtue of these, Facebook Lives, and if you missed any part of it, you can catch the recording. Dan's recordings are always popular. You can catch them on our Facebook Live page, but we do this so that we stay in touch with you. You check in with us. We check in with you. I'm fond of saying that the museum is where you are. And so thank you for being here on today. Tomorrow we'll have another program. Try to check in every weekend.
Who's on with you tomorrow?
I'm talking to Amanda Upson. She talks about the Filipino Warriors Project, about the Filipino women who fought during World War II and how they didn't get quite the benefit that they should have deserved. And this film is going to try to shine light on the Filipino women who fought side by side with American soldiers during World War II. So that's tomorrow. Thank you again, everyone. As my old friend Don Mabalan, Professor Don Mabalan would say, mahals and salamats to you.
Slums.
I'm Emil Guillermo. This is the FANHS.
Some people might get pissed off about that, but that's okay.
No, salamats. Mahals and salamats, she said.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I say, but I'm in slums. All right, man. Take care. That's Filipino American. That's so Pinoy, man.
That's it for okay, Dan. We're stopping the live stream. Thank you very much for joining.